The stars were burning, not the stars themselves, but everything around them. Ships, stations, cities on moons, all of it turned to fire and ash. Ambassador stood at the viewing window of his small escape vessel and watched his world die. Behind him, the great planet Prime grew smaller with each passing moment. Smoke clouds covered its beautiful blue oceans. They had come without warning, and they had come to destroy everything. Was a species known for peace. His people were thin and tall, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had never built weapons of war. They had never needed to. For 10,000 years, the collective had lived in harmony with their neighbors. They traded knowledge, art, and medicine. They believed that all thinking beings could find common ground. They proved them wrong. The Empire came from the outer rim of the galaxy. They were conquerors. Their bodies were covered in thick black armor, natural shells that protected them from harm. Their claws could cut through metal. Their ships numbered in the thousands, and they wanted everything they had built. The first attack came 3 weeks ago. The fleet appeared near the colony world of and burned it to nothing in 6 hours. They sent messages asking for peace talks. They sent back recordings of screaming colonists. Now they were at Prime itself. The defense force, small and poorly armed, had been destroyed in the first day of fighting. Millions were dead. Millions more would follow. Closed his eyes. He was 140 years old, ancient by human standards but middle-aged for his kind. He had spent his life believing in diplomacy. Now diplomacy had failed, and he had to make a choice that terrified him. He had to contact the humans. Every species in the known galaxy knew about the humans of Earth. They called them. Their home planet was a nightmare. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent. The water fell from the sky in storms that could flood entire cities. Predators hunted in every corner of their world. Diseases killed millions of them every year. And yet they survived. They did more than survive. They thrived. When humanity reached the stars, the other species watched them with fear. Humans could breathe air that would poison other beings. They could survive wounds that would kill anyone else. They ate the flesh of dead animals and drank fermented plant juice that was technically poison. They fought wars against each other for thousands of years, developing weapons and tactics that made the galaxy shudder. Most species avoided humans. They had never made formal contact with them. It was considered too dangerous. But now had no choice. He sat down at the communication console and began recording a message. His hands were shaking. He did not know if the humans would even respond. He did not know if they would care about a species they had never met, but he had to try. "This message is for the people of Earth," he said, his voice unsteady. "I am an ambassador of the collective. We are dying. The Empire has attacked our worlds without mercy. Our ships are gone. Our soldiers are dead. We have nothing left to fight with. We beg you, please, if there is any kindness in your hearts, help us. We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you. We can only promise our eternal gratitude. Please, we are desperate." He sent the message into the void and prayed to gods he was not sure existed. 12 hours later, the message reached Earth's orbital station, Horizon Prime. It was the largest structure humanity had ever built, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that held 50,000 people. From here, the Terran Defense Fleet protected human space. Admiral Park Ho was drinking tea in his office when the message arrived. He was 60 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face lined by decades of service. He had fought in 3 wars and lost count of the battles. His body carried scars from plasma burns, blade wounds, and one incident involving an airlock that he preferred not to discuss. He listened to the message twice. The alien's fear was clear in every word. Park had never met but he recognized the sound of someone who had lost all hope. He called a meeting of the United Earth Council. The council chamber was a round room with seats arranged in a circle. Representatives from every major nation and colony sat in those seats, watching as Park played the message. Spoke first, She was 55, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for cold logic. We have no treaty with we have no trade agreements. We have never even spoken to them before today. Why should we risk human lives for strangers? Because they asked, said a voice from the back. Everyone turned to look at Captain. He was young for his rank, only 32, with a lean face and calm eyes. He commanded the cruiser squadron attached to the home fleet. They asked, repeated. Someone out there is dying and they reached out to us because they had no one else. That means something. It means they are desperate, said. Desperate people will say anything. And what if it was us? Asked. What if humanity was burning and we sent a message into the dark, hoping someone would answer? Would we want them to calculate the cost first? The room was silent. Admiral Park stood up. I have spent my life fighting. I have killed enemies and buried friends. I have seen the worst of what war does to people, but I have also seen what happens when good people do nothing. The will not stop with the conquerors never stop. Today it is them. Tomorrow it could be us. He looked around the room. I am not ordering anyone to do this, but I am asking. Let us answer this call. Let us show the galaxy what humanity stands for. The vote was close, 12 in favor, 10 against, but it was enough. 3 hours later, the Terran Defense Fleet began to mobilize. Across the solar system, engines roared to life. Soldiers kissed their families goodbye. Pilots climbed into their cockpits. The greatest fleet humanity had ever assembled prepared to fly into the unknown. And in his small escape vessel, Ambassador received a response to his message. It was short, just 5 words. We are coming, hold on. Read those words and wept. For the first time in weeks, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. The Terran Defense Fleet was a sight that made even humans stop and stare. 12 battleships, each one a mountain of black steel and bristling weapons. 40 cruisers, fast and deadly. Over 100 support vessels, carrying everything from medical supplies to enough ammunition to fight for months. And at the center of this iron armada was the flagship, the Iron Will. Admiral Park Ho stood on the bridge of the Iron Will and watched his fleet form up around him. Through the wide viewing windows, he could see the curve of Earth below, blue and green and white, the only home humanity had ever known. Soon, they would leave it behind and fly into territory no human had ever visited. Admiral, said a voice behind him, jump calculations are complete. He turned to see Lieutenant Bay at her station. She was 30 years old, with short black hair and eyes that never seemed to miss anything. Her job was to coordinate the movements of the entire fleet, a task that would drive most people insane. She did it without breaking a sweat. Good work, Lieutenant, Park said. How long until we reach space? 14 hours through hyperspace, sir. We will exit near their border station. Park nodded. 14 hours. In 14 hours, they would meet aliens who had never seen a human before. In 14 hours, they would face an enemy that had destroyed an entire civilization. He hoped they were ready. On the lower decks of the Iron Will, Sergeant Sungwoo was preparing his Marines. 200 soldiers stood in the cargo bay, checking their weapons and armor. They were the best ground fighters humanity had, trained to survive in any environment and kill any enemy. Walked between the rows of soldiers, his boots heavy on the metal floor. He was 43 years old, built like a wall of muscle, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. 3 long scars ran across his left cheek, a gift from a pirate attack 10 years ago. He had killed the pirate with his bare hands. Listen up, he said, his voice filling the bay. You have all heard the briefing. We are going to help some aliens we have never met fight some other aliens we have never met. Some of you might be wondering why we should care. He stopped in front of a young soldier. Private Han Sora looked back at him with nervous eyes. She was 22, fresh out of training on her first real deployment. Private Han said, "Why are we doing this?" Sora swallowed hard. Because they asked for help, Sergeant. nodded slowly. "That is right," they asked. "Someone out there was dying and they called out for anyone who would listen. We heard them, and we do not ignore people who need help." He raised his voice again. "They think they are predators. They think they are the most dangerous things in the galaxy. They have never met us. We are going to show them what real predators look like." The Marines cheered. While the fleet prepared for war, they prepared for death. Ambassador had returned to the refugee ships gathered at the edge of their territory. 3 million survivors floated in cramped vessels, waiting for the end. When the human fleet arrived, was standing on the observation deck of his ship. The first thing he saw was a flash of light as the ships exited hyperspace. Then he saw the vessels themselves. His heart stopped. The human ships were massive. The largest vessel was perhaps a third the size of their smallest battleship, and the battleships themselves were terrifying. They were not smooth and elegant like craft. They were rough, angular, covered in weapons and armor plating. They looked like they had been built by a species that expected to be attacked from every direction and wanted to hit back harder. "Gods above," whispered one of the officers. "What are those things?" "Those," said quietly, "are our saviors." A communication request came through. Accepted it with trembling hands. The screen flickered, and then he was looking at a human for the first time in his life. Admiral Park Ho gazed back at him with calm, dark eyes. The human's face was strange too. Flat, with a small nose and thin lips. Hair on the top of his head but nowhere else on his face. But there was something in those eyes that recognized. It was the look of someone who had seen terrible things and survived them. "Ambassador," Park said, "I am Admiral Park of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your message. We are here to help." Could not speak for a moment. When he found his voice, it cracked with emotion. Thank you. I did not know if anyone would come." "We came," Park said simply. "Now tell me everything about their numbers, their tactics, their weaknesses. We need to know what we are facing." Over the next hour, shared everything they knew. They had over 300 warships in the system. They had ground forces on Prime itself, occupying the major cities. Their commander was a warrior known for his brutality and his refusal to accept surrender. When finished, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Admiral, do you think you can defeat them? There are so many." Park was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Let me tell you something about humanity, Ambassador. Our home world is not kind. It is a place of storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and predators. Everything on Earth is trying to kill us. We survive because we refuse to die. We adapt. We fight. We never give up." He leaned forward slightly. "They have numbers, but they have never faced humans before. They do not know what we can do. They do not know that we can take wounds that would kill your people and keep fighting. They do not know that we can operate without sleep for days. They do not know that we have been fighting wars since before we could write our names." A small smile crossed his face. "They are about to learn." Felt something shift inside him. When he looked at this human, he did not see a monster anymore. He saw a warrior who had come across the stars to help strangers. "We are grateful," said. "Whatever happens, we will never forget what you have done." "Save your gratitude," Park replied. "The battle has not started yet." As if answering his words, an alarm blared on the bridge. Long-range sensors had detected movement. The fleet was coming. Park's expression did not change. "Tell your people to get behind us, Ambassador. Things are about to get loud." The iron will turn to face the enemy. Behind it, the Terran fleet formed into battle lines. Weapons powered up. Shields activated. Pilots took their positions. The humans had come to war. And war was about to answer. The fleet moved like a swarm of angry insects. 312 vessels spread across the void of space, their black hulls drinking in the starlight. They had conquered 17 systems in the past decade. They had never been stopped. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Hunger. He was massive, even for a His armored shell was from 100 battles. His claws had torn through the bodies of countless enemies. He looked at the tiny human fleet on his display and felt nothing but contempt. 12 large vessels, his sensor officer reported. 40 medium, many smaller ones, perhaps 200 total. Against our 300, growled. These are either brave or stupid. Perhaps both, Commander. Made a sound that might have been laughter. Open a channel, let us give them a chance to run. His communication officer obeyed. A moment later was staring at a human face. The creature looked back at him without fear. That was interesting. Most species trembled when they saw a human vessel, said. This is Commander of the Empire. You have entered our hunting ground. Leave now and you may live. Stay, and you will die with these weaklings you have come to save. The human was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was calm like still water. This is Admiral Park Ho of the Terran Defense Fleet. We do not leave. We do not surrender. Blinked his many eyes. Then you will die. Many have tried to kill us, Park replied. We are still here. The channel closed, stared at the blank screen. Something cold moved through his body. It might have been doubt. He crushed it quickly. All ships, he ordered. Attack formation, destroy them all. The battle began. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Lieutenant Bay watched her screens fill with red enemy icons. Her fingers moved across her console, directing the fleet's response. She had trained for this moment her entire career. She was ready. Enemy vessels approaching in 3 waves, she reported. First wave will reach weapons range in 4 minutes. Admiral Park stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back. All ships hold formation. Wait for my command. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. These were veterans, men and women who had faced death before. They did not panic. They did not hesitate. They trusted their admiral and they trusted each other. The first wave was made up of 50 fast attack ships. They came screaming across the void, weapons already firing. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness. Energy beams cut through space. Enemy fire incoming, said. Brace for impact, Park ordered. The Iron Will shook as the first shots hit its shields. The ship groaned. Warning lights flickered, but the shields held. Park waited. The ships came closer and closer. When they were at point-blank range, he gave the order. All batteries open fire. The Terran fleet unleashed hell. Human weapons were designed for destruction. Rail guns fired tungsten slugs at speeds that could crack moons. Plasma cannons spat superheated death. Missile pods emptied their payloads in storms of fire. The first wave of ships flew into a wall of destruction. They did not survive. In 60 seconds, 50 vessels became 50 expanding clouds of debris. The vacuum of space swallowed the sound, but if there had been air, it would have been filled with the roar of dying ships. On the endless hunger, Commander stared at his display in disbelief. 50 ships, gone just like that. Impossible, he whispered. How? His sensor officer was shaking. Their weapons, Commander, they are far more powerful than we expected, and their ships, the damage that would destroy our vessels, they survive. His claws tightened on the armrests of his command chair. Send the second wave, send the third, overwhelm them with numbers. But numbers were not enough. Captain led his cruiser squadron directly into the center of the formation. His ship, the Silent Thunder, was smaller than the battleships, but it was fast and deadly. He had fought pirates, rebels, and rogue mining corporations. This was just another battle. Stay tight, everyone, he said over the squadron channel. Watch each other's backs. His squadron of 8 cruisers cut through like a knife through flesh. Their ships were designed for close combat and used that advantage. While the enemy tried to track them, the cruisers danced between their formations, hitting them from angles they could not defend. On the Iron Will, a plasma bolt broke through the shields and struck the port side. Metal screamed as 3 decks were torn open. Fire erupted in the corridors. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported. Fires on Decks 6 through 8. Admiral Park did not flinch. Seal those sections. Damage control teams respond. Continue firing. The ship kept fighting. Wounded, burning, but still fighting. That was the human way. In the medical bay, Medic O worked without stopping. Wounded sailors came in one after another. Burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds. She treated them all, her hands steady, her voice calm. A young sailor looked up at her with frightened eyes. "Are we going to die?" Smiled at him. "Not today, not on my watch." She meant it. She would not let anyone die if she could help it. That was her fight. The battle raged for 6 hours. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, wave after wave of ships, boarding parties that were cut down by marine defenders, concentrated fire that would have destroyed any other fleet in the galaxy. The humans took damage, ships were lost, sailors died, but they did not break, they did not run, they held their line and kept fighting. By the 7th hour they had lost 150 vessels. The rest of their fleet was pulling back, regrouping around the endless hunger. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had found a nightmare. On his bridge, Commander watched the wreckage of his fleet floating in space. He had never been defeated before. He had never faced an enemy like this before. "What are they?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that might have been fear. No one answered him. On the Iron Will, Admiral Park allowed himself a small breath of relief. The first battle was over and they had won, but the war was not finished. The still held prime. Millions of were still trapped on the surface. Captain Park said over the command channel, "Status report." "Squadron is intact, Admiral. A few scratches, nothing serious. We are ready for round 2. Park nodded. "Good, because round 2 is coming." He looked out at the distant planet, blue and beautiful and suffering. "We did not come all this way just to win a space battle. We came to save people, and that means we have to take back that planet." He turned to his communication officer. "Contact Sergeant. Tell him to prepare his Marines for ground assault." The hardest part was still ahead. But the humans were just getting started. The dropships fell through the sky of Prime like iron rain. Inside each one, human Marines sat in silence, their weapons ready, their hearts steady. They were about to land in a city occupied by enemies who had never been defeated on the ground. They were outnumbered at least 10 to 1. None of them were afraid. Sergeant Sungwoo stood at the front of his ship, watching the planet's surface grow larger through the viewing window. The capital city of Prime was burning. Smoke rose from dozens of locations. They had been thorough in their destruction. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot announced. Turned to face his Marines. 200 soldiers looked back at him, veterans and new recruits alike, all of them ready to die if they had to, none of them planning to. "Remember the mission," said. "They are holding civilians in the Central District. They plan to execute them tomorrow at dawn. We are going to stop that from happening. We go in hard, we hit them fast, and we do not stop until every last prisoner is free." Private Hand Sora gripped her rifle. This was her first real combat. Her hands wanted to shake, but she would not let them. She thought about her mother back on Earth, about the promise she had made to come home safe. She would keep that promise. 10 seconds. The ship shuddered as it hit the atmosphere. Outside, the sky turned orange with heat. 5 seconds. Pulled back the charging handle on his weapon. Go, go, go. The doors slammed open, and the Marines poured out into hell. The landing zone was a plaza in the outer city. They were waiting for them. Plasma fire tore through the air immediately. 2 Marines fell in the first 3 seconds. The rest kept moving, spreading out, finding cover behind shattered buildings and burned vehicles. Sora threw herself behind a collapsed wall. Beside her, A sergeant was already firing at the enemy. She raised her own rifle and looked for targets. There, a soldier, tall and armored, running across an open space. She aimed, breathed out, and squeezed the trigger. The round hit the alien in the chest. It stumbled but did not fall. Its natural armor had stopped the bullet. Sora fired again, and again. On the third shot, she hit its head where the armor was thinner. The dropped and did not move. Her first kill, she thought she would feel something. Horror, maybe, or guilt. Instead, she just felt focused. There would be time for feelings later. Right now, there was only the mission. Sergeant led his squad down a side street, pushing toward the central district. They were everywhere. They fought from windows, from rooftops, from behind barricades. They were bigger than humans, stronger than humans. Their claws could cut through body armor if they got close enough. They did get close enough, often. A warrior burst through a doorway and slammed into. The sergeant was thrown against a wall with enough force to crack his ribs. The alien loomed over him, claws raised for the killing blow. Drew his combat knife and drove it into his throat before the claws could fall. Hot alien blood sprayed across his face. The creature made a wet gurgling sound and collapsed on top of him. Pushed the body away and stood up. His chest screamed with pain. He ignored it. "Sergeant, you're hurt," one of his soldiers said. "I am fine," replied. "Keep moving." They kept moving. The fighting continued block by block, building by building. They had expected to fight soldiers, peaceful beings who had never known war. Instead, they were fighting humans, a species that had been killing each other since before recorded history. One officer watched from a command post as his soldiers were cut down one by one. The humans took wounds that should have been fatal and kept fighting. They lost limbs and still crawled toward the enemy. They died with their teeth in throats. "What are these things?" the officer whispered to his aide. "They will not fall. Why will they not fall?" His aide had no answer. By nightfall, the outer city was clear. The Marines had taken heavy losses, 40 soldiers dead, almost 100 wounded, but they had pushed them back to the central district where the prisoners were held. Sora sat against a broken wall trying to catch her breath. Her uniform was covered in blood, most of it not her own. She had killed 7 soldiers. She had watched friends die. She had kept fighting because stopping meant dying. Medic O found her there. The medic's white coat was no longer white. She had been treating wounded soldiers since the battle started, moving from position to position, never stopping. "Any injuries?" asked. "Just cuts," Sora said. "I am fine." Checked her anyway. "You did well today, Private. I saw you out there. You kept your head." Sora did not know what to say. "I just did what I was trained to do." Smiled, tired but warm. That is what courage looks like sometimes. Not feeling brave, just doing what needs to be done anyway. She moved on to the next soldier. Sora watched her go and felt something shift inside her. She had come here as a girl playing soldier. She was becoming something else now, something harder, something that could look at death and not look away. The final assault began at midnight. They had gathered their remaining forces around the detention center where the prisoners were held. It was a massive building, designed to hold criminals. Now it held 10,000 innocent civilians waiting to die. Led the charge personally. His ribs were broken, his body covered in bruises and cuts, but he moved like he was fresh from a night's sleep. The Marines followed him without hesitation. They fought desperately. They knew this was their last stand. But desperation was not enough against soldiers who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Sora was with the squad that breached the detention center's main entrance. They moved through the corridors, clearing room after room. Every they found, they killed. There was no mercy. There could be no mercy, not after what they had done. They found the prisoners in the lower levels. 10,000 huddled together in cells, waiting for death. When they saw the human soldiers coming, they screamed. They thought it was the executioners. Then they realized these were different beings. Strange, small creatures with soft skin and kind eyes. Approached the nearest cell and broke the lock with his rifle butt. The door swung open. Inside, a mother held her children close, staring at him with huge, terrified eyes. Lowered his weapon. "You are safe now," he said. "We are here to take you home." The mother did not understand his words, but she understood his voice, and slowly she began to cry. One by one, the cells were opened. One by one, the prisoners were led out into the night. 10,000 souls who had expected to die at dawn instead walked free under unfamiliar stars, guided by soldiers from a world they had never seen. Above the city, the sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming, the dawn they had promised would bring death. Instead, it brought liberation. Sora stood at the entrance of the detention center and watched the sun rise over a city that had been saved. She was exhausted, hurt, and covered in the blood of her enemies. But she was alive, and so were the people they had come to save. That was enough. That was everything. The fleet was broken, but it was not finished. 150 vessels still circled Prime, their crews watching the surface with horror as human marines tore through their ground forces. Commander stood on the bridge of the endless hunger and felt something he had never felt before in his long career of conquest. Defeat. It tasted like ash in his mouth. It burned in his blood. He had come to this system as a conqueror. He had expected to add another world to the empire, another species to their list of victims. Instead, he had watched his ships burn and his soldiers die at the hands of creatures who refused to stay down. "Commander," his first officer said quietly, "the ground forces report complete failure. The humans have freed the prisoners. Our troops are in full retreat." Did not respond. He stared at the tactical display, at the human fleet that still held formation between him and the refugee ships. They had taken damage. Several of their vessels were limping, trailing smoke and debris, but they held their positions. They would not move. "Commander," the first officer said again, "what are your orders?" His claws tightened on his command chair until the metal groaned. "If we cannot have victory," he said slowly, "then we will have vengeance. All ships form up on the endless hunger. We are going to destroy their flagship." The fleet began to move. 150 vessels, all that remained of what had been the mightiest invasion force the Empire had ever assembled. They gathered around the endless hunger like wolves around their pack leader, and they turned toward the Iron Will. On the human flagship, Lieutenant Bay watched the enemy formation with calm professionalism. "Admiral, they are consolidating. It looks like they are preparing for a concentrated assault on our position." Admiral Park Ho studied the display. His ship was damaged. His crew was exhausted. They had been fighting for nearly 20 hours straight, but they were not done yet. "They are coming for us," he said. "The commander must think that if he can destroy this ship, the rest of the fleet will break." "Will they, sir?" asked. Park looked at her with eyes that had seen decades of war. "What do you think, Lieutenant?" She allowed herself a small smile. "I think they do not know us very well." The fleet advanced. The human fleet responded. What followed was not a battle. It was a dance of death, two wounded forces throwing everything they had at each other one final time. Captain led his cruiser squadron into the teeth of the enemy formation. His ship, the Silent Thunder, was down to half its weapon systems. 3 of his 8 cruisers had been destroyed earlier, but he flew like a man possessed, weaving between enemy fire, striking at weak points, drawing attention away from the Iron Will. "Stay with me," he called to his remaining ships, "just a little longer." On the surface below, Sargent watched the battle in the sky. He was sitting on the steps of the detention center, his broken ribs screaming with every breath. Around him, his surviving Marines were helping the civilians onto evacuation shuttles. Private Hand Sora stood beside him. "Will they win?" she asked, looking up at the flashes of light among the stars. Was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Yes, they will." "How do you know?" "Because we did not come all this way to lose." The final clash happened quickly. Commander ordered his remaining ships into a wedge formation, with the endless hunger at the point. They would punch through the human line and destroy the iron will or die trying. They died trying. The Terran fleet responded with everything it had left: rail guns, plasma cannons, missiles, even kinetic rounds from smaller weapons. The space between the two fleets became a wall of fire and metal. Ships died by the dozens. But the endless hunger kept coming, absorbing damage that would have destroyed any other vessel, pushing forward with the blind determination of a creature that had never learned how to surrender. At the last moment, Commander gave his final order: all power to forward weapons, ram them if we have to, for the Empire. The endless hunger accelerated toward the iron will. Its weapons blazed with desperate fury. Its crew screamed war cries that no human would ever hear. Admiral Park stood on his bridge and watched death coming for him. His crew looked at him, waiting for orders. He gave them. "All batteries, focus fire on the enemy flagship. Do not stop until it is gone." The iron will fired. Every weapon it had, every gun that still worked, every missile that remained in its tubes. A storm of destruction slammed into the endless hunger. The flagship did not survive. For a single moment, the ship seemed to freeze in space. Then its reactor core breached, and it vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. Commander, who had conquered 17 systems and killed millions of beings, ceased to exist in an instant of absolute destruction. The remaining ships saw their commander die. They saw their fleet broken, and they did what they had never done before in their history. They ran. The surviving vessels turned and fled into hyperspace, leaving Prime behind forever. Within minutes, the system was clear. The battle was over. Silence fell across the bridge of the Iron Will. Then, slowly, the crew began to cheer. 3 days later, the council gathered in what remained of their capital city. Representatives from every surviving colony had come to offer their thanks to the humans who had saved them. Ambassador stood at the front of the assembly, facing Admiral Park and his officers. The admiral looked tired. His uniform was worn. His face carried new lines that had not been there a week ago, but his eyes were still calm, still steady. "Admiral Park," said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, "my people owe you a debt that we can never repay. You came to us when no one else would. You fought for us when we could not fight for ourselves. You gave us back our future." He paused, struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "When I sent that message into the void, I did not truly believe anyone would answer. The galaxy is cold and cruel. Species help themselves and ignore the suffering of others. That is the way of things." He looked at the human standing before him. "You proved that wrong. You showed us that there is still kindness among the stars. There is still hope." Park was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "Ambassador, we did not come here for gratitude. We did not come here for reward. We came because someone was screaming for help and we heard them." He met's eyes. "My species has spent thousands of years fighting each other. We have done terrible things to ourselves and to our world, but we have also learned something important. We have learned that the measure of a people is not how they treat their friends. It is how they treat strangers in need." He took a step forward. "They are no longer strangers. You are friends, and humanity does not abandon its friends." Bowed his head. "Then let this be the beginning of a new friendship, between our peoples, between our worlds. Let us build something better together." Park offered his hand in the human gesture of agreement, looked at it for a moment, then reached out with his own long, slender fingers and clasped it. The crowd erupted in applause. Later that night, after the ceremonies were over, Lieutenant Bay found Captain on the observation deck of the Iron Will. He was staring out at the stars, his face unreadable. "Captain," she said, "you should be resting." "So should you, Lieutenant." She came to stand beside him. Together, they looked out at the lights in the darkness. "Do you think we made a difference?" she asked. Was silent for a while, then he said, "Someone called for help, we answered. We saved 10,000 lives, maybe more. We stopped a fleet of conquerors." He turned to look at her. "Yes, I think we made a difference." "They are still out there," said. "They will want revenge." "Let them come," replied. "We will answer that call too." Somewhere on the surface below, Private Han Sora was sitting with a group of children. They did not share a language, but they shared something more important: trust, safety, the knowledge that the darkness had passed and the light had returned. One of the children reached out and touched Sora's hand. Its skin was blue and cool against her warm brown fingers, but the child smiled at her, and she smiled back. She thought about her mother, about the promise she had made to come home. She would keep that promise, but first she would finish what they had started here. She would help build a galaxy where no one had to scream for help alone. A galaxy where the call was always answered.